Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Carly Pope, an actor, writer, and producer you might know from TV series like Popular, 24, Suits, and Arrow, or movies like Young People Fucking, Textuality, and This Last Lonely Place. She's currently starring in Neill Blomkamp's Demonic, playing a woman who uses experimental technology to venture into the mind of her comatose mother with disastrous results. It's in theaters and available on demand right now. Carly picked Boogie Nights, the movie that put Paul Thomas Anderson on the map in 1997. An eccentric, electrifying look at the glory days of the porn industry in Southern California, it stars Mark Wahlberg as a young performer of limited range with natural talents that make him an instant star in his chosen field. I know. Anderson surrounds Wahlberg with an absolutely stunning roster of rising indie talent, and also Burt Reynolds in the role that earned the actor his only Oscar nomination. It's the Goodfellas of porn, and I mean that in the best possible way. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I was trying to think about a film that came up at a certain time in my life that felt like a transition from one thing to the other. And Boogie Nights, for me, I was in my last year of high school when it came out. And I had just started acting professionally. And I felt like that was the first film that I really engaged with or connected with on like a more adult level. Like I saw the film and it sort of blew me away on a number of levels. Do I think it's a perfect film? No, but I really, really enjoyed it. Like I was so entertained by it. I was moved by it. I was inspired by the performances in it. I was titillated by the other references, the camera work. Like there were the soundtrack. Pardon me, the soundtrack, which is
great,
phenomenal. And I felt like it was a really good combination of tone that it just percolated this feeling of like, that's the type of thing I would want to do. That's the type of film. And also I think I really love an ensemble. Like I really love ensemble films and to me, again, it was just sort of, I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson just sort of like perfectly wove in the elements that I was looking for, especially at the time when I had sort of thought, if I continue to act, this is the type of thing I would want to be a part of.
Oh, see, now I totally understand that, because the energy that comes off that film when you walk out of it is so buzzy and exciting, even though like the second half of the film is a fairly grim descent into misery. Yeah. Anderson somehow gives you this incredible high coming out of it. I saw it with an audience at the Uptown One in Toronto. I think it must have been opening night because I missed it at TIFF. I was freelancing at the time and I just couldn't get to it. And this is the other problem with TIFF that no one ever talks about. Yeah. If a movie is long, and Boogie Nights is not short, you can't get to it. You basically, like, they always schedule the three films I most want to see against each other. Just for 20 odd years, it's always been the way. And Boogie Nights, every screening was inaccessible for some reason, for one reason or another. 45-minute overlap here, 25-minute overlap there. I couldn't get to it. So I missed it. And everybody was excited about it and jumping up and down with this joy of this film. Yeah. And I caught up to it, I think a month later. I think it opened in October here. Saw it on opening night at the Uptown One with a packed house. And it played like a roller coaster. You could just feel the room responding up and down and going with the characters and recoiling. And, like the big shock cut that divides the film, the jump from Bill murdering someone.
The long way down. It's like, it is that dark night of the soul for everyone. And I really, first of all, that's amazing. I think you were meant to see it with Gen Pop. Like that's the deal, right? Like you're meant to see it in like standing room only and have that energy of everybody experiencing it for the first time together. That's incredible.
Excellent point.
But it's and I can't remember. I know that I saw it in the theaters. I believe I was with my older brother and some of our friends. But I can't remember exactly where I was. I just remember being so floored by the mix of everything and exactly like the how evocative it was to me when you change into that dark night of the soul. And there's that bell toll, that's kind of like throughout. And I think Paul Thomas Anderson used that same, or it's similar to the beginning of Hard Eight. Like, I think he has that same kind of like, church bell sort of sound that
it's like a somber, mournful thing, like an attitude that creeps in.
It really sets the tone, and you just sort of feel this impending doom. But especially with Boogie Nights, like where it hits in the film and how it interplays with everybody's faltering or everybody's mishap or bad luck is so powerful, I found.
Yeah. As end of era movies go, making a film about pornography in the late 70s and early 80s, I mean, it's great because we have this weight of knowledge. We know all the speed bumps that are coming, and then the actual disasters ahead of those. There's drugs, yes, but also AIDS. Like everything is coming for these people, and they don't know it. And I think the best thing about it is the graceful way he makes video the villain, that it's not any of these things that will take them out individually. It's the existential threat that the industry of professionals is facing because of video replacing film and amateur pornography taking over the world. And this was 1997. He hadn't even seen where it's gone. Like, he's predicting the problem faced again in the 21st century with YouTube and social media and all of the other I guess democratization of pornography is a phrase. I feel like I should declare this up front. It's come up in a couple of episodes before where we deal with this sort of material. It's like, I cannot watch pornography. I see the camera angles and the lighting and I click right out. I've never enjoyed it. But there's an appreciation for it in this film, especially with the sort of self-knowing way that he has the actors directing themselves in scenes to be just terrible. Like that amazing thing Julianne Moore does. Yeah. I mean,
Julianne Moore is like, she's such a revelation in this film. And again, that speaking of on a personal side, like her performance in this was so igniting to me. And I loved it. It was so real. It was so human. It was so soft, but also so forceful. She was such a force in the film. Going back to your point, like, I thought that's what I agree with you. Like videotape was the villain, as opposed to all these other things that we could easily discriminate for,
Right.
And it wasn't that. It was the change from film to videotape. And I think, again, Burt Reynolds, like in one of the most amazing, I just love him in this film. And as Jack Horner, who's like this auteur, he has to pivot and he has to learn, and he stumbles through it. And I thought that was just from like a filmmaking perspective, because that was the thing too. In 1997, we're still shooting on film, right? Like films are shooting on films. So
HD looked terrible. And it's willingness to empathize with all of these characters who are at the end of their viability, but don't all know it. Is just so, it's weird. It's a thing that Anderson kind of stops doing after Magnolia. Maybe Punch Drunk Love. Punch Drunk Love is all about identifying with Barry, but he starts creeping off into this colder mode as a director. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, he's very, very good at what he's doing and he wants to pursue it, but I also don't think that his later films have the same visceral impact. There Will Be Blood does. That's sort of the part where he starts, I'm actually arguing against myself.
No. I feel you though. I understand what you're saying. And there has been like a marked transition, again, not necessarily for worse. It's just different. And I also appreciate that about him, that there has been this evolution. but I equally appreciate that some of the earlier stuff, which are these true ensemble pieces where he's reusing the same troupe of actors so frequently. You know, he's recycling a lot of the same concepts. And to me, they were just sort of like becoming bigger and better and more coalesced. And that's the thing. Magnolia is another one that I know you've had conversations about before, but I love Magnolia as a film was just like mind bending to me too. It was so I had so much feeling watching that film and so much feeling every time I've watched it since, you know, and I think I do really appreciate a film that feels like, well, you're in a world that maybe we don't know about, or maybe we have judgments about, or maybe we have preconceived notions. And then, you know, you're watching these really human stories, like the porn in the film is not sensationalized at all.
Sure.
The porn in the film is very normalized. We're also seeing all the human elements that each person is facing as you're speaking of, that like these people are at the precipice of either the end of their time or a transition into something else. You know, you have Amber Waves, who goes on to be a director, and you have Buck Swope, who goes on to owning his stereo store.
Yeah, he's an entrepreneur. I mean, they all are, right? They're all.
Yeah. And you know, you have Reed Rothschild, who's a magician, who does and he blends the worlds, you know, between magic and titillation. And so I don't know. I just felt like I was so engaged from like the beginning of that film, from like the opening of, you know, like the neon, like all the neon lights and that whole start, and then that beautiful tracking shot through the nightclub, and having like the song, what's the song? Best of my love, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
The emotions, it's like, it's so fun. The energy is so high. And I felt like, again, as far as openings go, and I know that was like an homage to Goodfellas, and I know that like that's where it was coming from, but still, it was done with such energy and such lightness and such particular, like every character, like I felt like I was like, every character was not squandered in that opening. You know, like we knew what we were going to get, and we knew that we were going to see all those characters. And I felt like he did a really fair job of showcasing everyone.
Yeah. And that's what I mean about the idea that he loves everyone, that he's introducing us to them with enthusiasm. He's not hanging clouds over people's heads or showing them in the middle of doing things they shouldn't be doing, or that might push us against their character. It just draws us in. It's like, what is this person doing, and why, and who are they, and will we see them again? Yeah. And his ability to cast, I mean, this is what I held it up at the very beginning of the recording. I'm just letting the listeners know. The cover for Boogie Nights is this great sort of artificial hand-drawn poster look. And the incredible thing to me about that poster is that if you look very closely at it, the only people who vaguely look like themselves are Burt Reynolds, maybe William H. Macy, and Wahlberg. Yeah. And that just tells me to remember that in 1997, most of these people were new to audiences. I'd seen them in independent films, and they'd been around. Julianne Moore had made Safe and Vanya and Shortcuts, and Don Cheadle was in, I guess, Devil in the Blue Dress was the one that really popped him a couple of years earlier, but they were all working actors. Yeah. But Anderson's ability to cast each of these people and then surround Mark Wahlberg with them, because he's not the strongest actor and he's very well suited to this role. Oh my God. They all play this. It's a genuine supporting cast. Everybody you get the sense that like it's the old theater joke, right? If someone leaves a room, they're probably in a different movie. We just don't get to see it. There's a sense that there's a life for everybody involved. Yeah. But the work that's going on, the way Reilly is just so quietly funny in a way that he hadn't been before. It speaks to everybody's future in the movie, not their characters necessarily, but every single one of these people is someone you're going to follow for the rest of their career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even like, Thomas Jane is not listed in like the front credits. Nicole Ari Parker, who I think is glorious, and she's so good in the movie. Same thing, Melora Walters, who also like, who then goes on to many other things, but Magnolia, and like blows it out of the water. It's like I agree with you. His ability to cast is so top notch and spot on. And Mark Wahlberg, to me, that is like an undeniably fantastic performance. Like that is, I just think like he goes so perfectly and seamlessly from this like wide-eyed teen into like the all is lost Dirk Diggler that he becomes, and I believe every moment. I believe every single moment. He was so plugged in and so connected, and it was such a joy to watch. I felt like a real triumph watching him, because I think that I think that he hadn't necessarily had a showcase like that before. Certainly not the depth of the content of the film, and he nailed it. I really like, I've followed every single thing that he was saying and doing,
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like everybody is just, there's so much, there's such every single person I felt hit the tone of levity and pathos. Like everyone. Heather Graham is so heartbreaking as Roller Girl. Like, Philip Seymour Hoffman is just a revelation as Scotty. Like Alfred Molina. I mean, I just was, I used to be able to quote the film. I can't anymore, but I used to be able to quote it. And I feel like, again, my older brother and all his friends, like it was a movie that we often circled back on and spoke about. I think music plays a big part in film. I really think that, and I think in terms of this film, like the soundtrack, not let alone the score, because I think the score was really that incredible that dying carousel music that Michael Penn uses that tells you the party's ending before the party ends. Yes, and that's the thing. Yes, exactly. And so like the use of score and the use of soundtrack in this film was just really memorable and also just really takes you on a ride.
Yeah, it's I had seen Hard Eight and been sort of underwhelmed, I guess, just because it felt, I don't know why, it felt airless. I've never really connected to it. It just felt like it was content with its premise and didn't, and now I understand he just wanted to focus on the performances, and really what was happening in terms of the plot was just an excuse to get to the next scene.
Yes.
And so I can watch it now and think, I see what he's doing. That just didn't click for me. I feel that way about the second half of The Master, where the movie says everything it has to say right up until Freddie leaves on the motorcycle, and then we're still going for another hour. But I get it; he's exploring the characters. But with Boogie Nights, there is an energy and a pacing, a musical pacing that he brings to it through the soundtrack that doesn't happen very often in his films. It happens again in Magnolia, but I think those are the only two.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think like that's, I guess, to my point, for me subjectively, like I think those are my two favorite films of his. And I think that's a big reason why, because I feel it does sort of like move you on this kind of like other level, this other layer that adds to it, and like the sound and the music and like everything added on to what's already going on with these characters and the performances. It's just so like, I felt like, I felt like I was in a speedball the whole time.
Yeah.
Just sort of like, there was so much going on. I had so much feeling of what was going on. And the other thing too, even in going back to Hard Eight for a second, I agree with you. Like, it's not my favorite by any means. The performances are all there. Absolutely. The cast is there. The performances are there. But I felt like it was a little bit, stagey. Though that said, I really forgive that, because it's like that was his first feature.
Sure. Yeah.
and so that's the thing. Like I forgive that I understood what the plot was, that what he wanted to tell. And again, you know, Philip Baker Hall is again someone that I just inherently feel for. You know, like I inherently feel for Philip Baker Hall. I just think he's a sympathetic actor, you know, sympathetic, relatable actor. But what I was going to say is that even in Hard Eight, which to me was not my favorite of his, I still really appreciated like the rhythm and the cadence of his dialogue. Like there's something about his dialogue that to me, you would think it might feel too stagey. You would think it might feel too cumbersome or specific, but for some reason it works. And that was, I found myself with Hard Eight going like, I actually think it was like the dialogue of the film didn't bother me. It was the rhythm of like the actual scenes that bothered me. But I don't know if that makes sense. I guess it's kind of like a you know, a half-cooked idea. But it's pacing versus flow. I totally get that. There's the naturalistic pacing of dialogue, and then there's what's happening in the film to guide you. Yeah. But I hear his dialogue, I guess is what I'm saying. And you can hear it in Boogie Nights as well. But again, it doesn't bother me at all. Like oftentimes if I'm watching a film and I can hear the dialogue, I kind of tune out because I'm like, oh, okay, this is just like, it was great on the page, but it doesn't really work coming out of a human, you know, like coming out of like a human voice, 3D person. But in this case, like I just really appreciate his, and again, as I mentioned, I could in the past quote the film. And I could give you an example, but it is something that I notice, especially I did notice it in Hard Eight. I certainly noticed it in Boogie Nights, and I noticed it in Magnolia too. And I just, and beyond, I mean, it's almost like he writes with, you know, there is a rhythm. It's almost like poetry, but it doesn't feel that way when you receive it as an audience. Or at least for me, it didn't. Yeah. Well, Boogie Nights feels like the movie where he found himself, or at least the movie where he was able to do exactly what he wanted, even though there were compromises. He originally wanted to make it 3 hours long and NC-17, and New Line said, you can have an R rating or bring it in under 3 hours and probably will still have an R rating. And the amazing thing is, I discovered this a little while ago, he fought the R rating thing harder than almost anything else because he was convinced that this wouldn't have a market, that audiences wouldn't care. It was going to be a niche picture no matter what he did. And the influence that it's had and the way that it resonates throughout the independent film culture for, 15 years, I think there's echoes of Boogie Nights and all sorts of things. I love the idea that he didn't see that this whole film is about prescience and knowing what's going to happen and being ahead of the characters. We don't know exactly what's going to happen to them, but we know that the industry they're working in isn't going to be the same by the time we're watching the movie. Right. And that he just had this amazing blind spot of his own, I think is just wonderful because he sees everything except that. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. It's, it's funny, isn't it? It's like art is so subjective in general, but in this case, like it is like he has an objective point of view on it, but he's not objectifying it. Yeah. It's saying like, it's really, I don't know. That's so funny. And I do find it really interesting that not long after this film came out was the change in the film industry too. And again, the porn of the 70s was like, I imagine, or at least it's suggesting that it was as mainstream. It just had different content that you were showing on screen. Yeah, I mean, it was in movie theaters, right? You could actually, and there were legitimate crossovers. I mean, certainly I've seen enough documentaries to know that the stuff he's referencing is painfully real, is exacting as possible. There was I think it was the Criterion Laserdisc that came with a John Holmes documentary that has scenes that he just cheerfully replicates for Dirk and Reed in the course of Boogie Nights. The first scene we see with Amber is a scene that John Holmes played. And it's just, it's almost line for line. It's definitely shot for shot.
It's jarring to see it.
Amazing. I'd actually really like to see that documentary. I had heard about that and I haven't checked it out, but it would be interesting, especially after talking about Boogie Nights, to kind of go back.
Yeah, no, he's steeped in this stuff. I mean, it's I get the early comparisons of Boogie Nights to Pulp Fiction, right? Because of a big ensemble cast and a stylized approach, in the sense that the director is recreating a mode that he absolutely knows inside and out and loves very much.
Yeah.
But I never understood the larger comparison, because Tarantino is he's like a cultural magpie. He's taking pieces from the movies that he likes and making new movies out of them, whereas Anderson is creating a whole world. Yeah. And then it's as immersive. Like, we're getting the same sense of texture and the love of interaction and the strange things that happen inside of it. But I think, like, I honestly think the Jesse's Girl sequence with Melina is better than a Tarantino sequence for that thing. Like, he gives you this. Yeah. And again, to go back to Mark Wahlberg being so much better in this than he could have been. The scene where Dirk goes dead and just sort of, and we are stuck there with him in this moment.
You like the 45-second stare?
Yeah.
Like where he's just locked in. Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's horror, and then he slowly realizes that, you know what, if I am going to die, this is fun. That weird little electricity of him, you could feel the hair on other people's arms going up in the theater. Yeah, that was never experienced a moment like that.
Well, it was, again, that scene. I mean, that scene was so seminal. And I don't know, maybe you would know, Norm, if, like, was that a reference to anything else?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay. So yeah, I thought that was like his own. And again, if that is like mastery, because there's so much texture in that scene. There's so much going on. It is impossible to extricate yourself from that environment. It feels like it's happening to you, like the firecrackers going off, the music being like 5 decibels too loud, like the awkwardness of Molina's costume, like everything, his bodyguard standing vigil, like there's so much tension, and there's so much tension, there's so much chaos. And then, so especially in that moment that you're speaking of, like when you find that kind of pause and that kind of like stillness, and then the kind of like transition from like one thing to another, it is a roller coaster. Like, it is like everything is coming up. Don't know what it's going to look like. Like, everything's coming up.
Yeah.
And that scene was for sure, like, to me, a standout. And, I also loved Amber and Roller Girl in their the drug haze. Yeah. You were saying, you used to quote the dialogue. The only line that I ever want to quote is, "Will you be my mom?" But it just makes me so sad. I know. It's like crushing. It's soul crushing. But it was done beautifully. And again, it's done with that perfect balance of tone that it just feels like everyone was in on the secret. You know what I mean? Like, everyone, and again, whether that's casting, whether that's Paul Thomas Anderson, his direction, whether that is just innately every single one of those actors, adherence to the tone of the film. To me, it's so pitch perfect that each actor in each scene kind of finds that balance between humor and heartache.
Yeah. What's incredible to me is the way that he replicates the sort of generic nature of pornographic structure, which is what we see with Amber performing in her scene. We see Julianne Moore suddenly become less interesting, which is incredible. I've never seen her do that before or since. Yeah. But he pulls on this other string too, which is that if you describe the events of Boogie Nights, it sounds like a police blotter. It doesn't sound sympathetic or engaging if you just relate the plot. It's, this idiot does this bad person does this. You can step back and reduce it all to cliche, and the same thing that Tarantino does, really. He takes crime movies and puts real people in them to inflate the humanity of it. And the thing about Boogie Nights is that by the end of it, and it works for the scene with Melina with the 45-second stare, is that it makes an emotional impact because by the time it's happening, we get to know, like, we know who these people are. And it's that whole thing where it's like he created the darker version of that "it's funnier if you were there" joke, where, we're suffering along with them. And it is excruciating to watch these people in bad situations because we know how good they are. We know how well-meaning they are and how they don't want to hurt each other and how they are operating as a family. And it isn't until they all accept that on their own terms that they can have light in their lives again, which is another beautiful thing. That it's also, like Magnolia hits the same note, but they both hit this so exquisitely in this thing about compassion and empathy that's running through these early films of his that I feel like a loss in the colder movies that have come since.
Yeah. And I agree. I think, I mean, it is, I feel like it makes his films so relatable, even if we don't relate to the setting or the environment. It's like the people are so relatable. Like, William H. Macy, what he's going through, what little Bill is going through in that film that culminates in, the countdown at New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
When everything changes from the 70s to the 80s. It's like, it is a very good construct. But beyond that, it really, like, again, you have somebody that's sort of, a crew member on the sidelines that you are so taken with and so engaged with and feeling so much for. And though he made the choice that he made, it's like he got his own personal victory.
On his terms anyway. On
his terms. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's a film that shaped a different way that I looked at cinema, maybe, or what could be.
And those are the best ones because they're the ones that stay with you, right? I mean, Jonathan Levine and I were discussing Billy Madison the other day, and that's his version. It's the film that showed him that you can do comedy in a completely different structure mode. You can embrace this horrible, unpleasant funniness, and still make movies, and he's doing okay. But to that end, I guess the way out of the podcast is also always the same, which is there anything of Boogie Nights that you've lifted or borrowed or referenced or stolen outright in your own work?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I
mean, there's some parent stuff going on in Demonic, but I don't really see the same relationships.
Yeah, but there is that sense of searching for your mother. There is that sense of finding connection and finding familial place. So there is that. I mean, I wouldn't say that I directly was, I was directly channeling Roller Girl in my performance in Demonic, but I definitely do feel like, if anything that I've taken from Boogie Nights, it is that sense of like finding the human element in every story. It is that sense of trying to like connect and plug into something that's relatable and hopefully take an audience on that journey.
Yeah. Well, plus if you'd had roller skates, you would have probably gotten out of the problems a lot faster.
Norm, if I had roller skates, I'd probably have a broken neck and not be walking, but it would be good exercise.
My thanks to Carly Pope, who you can see starring in Neill Blomkamp's Demonic right now, in theaters and on VOD. Thanks also to Claire Peace McConnell. She knows what she did. You can find Carly on Twitter at Pope_on-a-rope, because of course. And you can find Boogie Nights on Blu-ray and DVD from New Line Home Entertainment in a special edition that has most of the amazing supplements produced for the Criterion Collection's Laserdisc edition. It's also streaming on Netflix in the US and Canada, and on Crave and Amazon Prime Video Stars channel in Canada as well. It's also available to rent or buy on most VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days, and writing the weekly Now streaming letter, which will be relaunching around Labor Day weekend in a cool new format. I'll tell you where to find it. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web, actually, someoneelsesmovie.com is being problematic right now. The migration to Simplecast borked the someoneelsesmovie.com site, so I'll figure it out. Anyway, check Twitter. You'll always find links there. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot when you can. I'll see you next time.